I want to start by telling you what kind of person I am, because it matters for what I'm about to tell you. I have a marine biology degree. I worked field research for 3 years before I joined the commission. I am the kind of person who measures things, who writes down what she observes before she assigns it meaning, who has spent enough time in the natural world to be comfortable with the parts of it that most people find uncomfortable. Blood, decay, the mechanics of predation, none of that rattles me. That's not a brag. It's just the baseline you need to understand for any of this to land the way it should. I also want to tell you that my marriage ended in April and that I took the Misty Fjords posting specifically because it keeps me in the field and out of the apartment in Ketchikan, where I still have his coffee mug on the counter because I haven't decided what to do with it. I'm telling you that because the state of mind I was in on November 2nd was clear and focused and not the state of mind of a person making things up to fill a silence. The field doesn't give you silence. The field gives you work. That morning I had a lot of work to do, and I was grateful for it. The Bem Canal tidal flat is one of the most beautiful places I have ever worked. At minus tide, the flat runs 800 meters from the tree line to the water line, a broad gray-green expanse of eelgrass and mud and exposed gravel. And in November, the light comes in flat and silver off the canal, and the Sitka spruce on the far bank are black against it, and the whole thing looks like a painting that was made to remind you the world is enormous and you are not. I went in at 6:10 in the morning to follow up on 2 harbor seal mortality reports. A kayak operator had found them the previous week and filed the report, and I was the responding officer. The first 40 minutes were completely normal. I walked the upper flat. I noted the otter sign and the bear tracks and the standard late fall ungulate activity at the mud margin, and I wrote everything down the way I always do. It was cold and quiet, and the smell was brine and kelp and clean mud, and I was happy. That's the word, happy. I was doing the thing I came to this posting to do, and I was good at it, and the morning was beautiful. Then I found the seals, 3 of them, spread across 40 meters of the lower flat in a line that ran parallel to the water line, evenly spaced, which is the first thing that was wrong. Predation doesn't distribute carcasses in a line. Predation distributes carcasses according to where the pursuit ended and where the animal fell. Evenly spaced means someone arranged them. Each one was on its back, flippers out, intact from the neck forward, which is the second thing that was wrong because the neck was not intact. Complete cervical separation in every case. The head was gone, not consumed, not scattered by scavengers. Gone. And I walked the surrounding flat in a grid, 30 meters in every direction from each site, and there were no heads. The bones told me the most. I have a background in marine mammal anatomy, and I know what predation looks like in bone. I know the torsional spiral fracture of a bone being worked by dentition. I know the gnaw scoring, the crush pattern, the marks that teeth leave. The pectoral flipper bones on all 3 seals showed mid-shaft fractures with clean perpendicular breaks, the kind of break that happens when you apply compression directly across the diameter of the bone. Not chewing, pressing, the way you'd break a stick across your knee. The marrow was exposed at both ends, and there was no tooth mark anywhere. Something had broken those bones with its hands. And here is the detail that I keep coming back to, the one that sits with me when I lie awake at night in the apartment with his coffee mug on the counter. No ravens, no eagles. It was 7:30 in the morning on a November tidal flat, 3 dead seals in the open on exposed eelgrass, and there was not a single bird within the range of my voice. I called out. I do that sometimes to gauge avian response. Nothing. The flat was evacuated. Whatever had been here, the birds knew it and they had left, and they had not come back. The tracks were between the second and third site, pressed into the silt where it was softest, bipedal, 14.5 inches long. The stride between them was 71 inches, and I measured it 4 times because the first 3 times I thought I had to be misreading the sediment. 71 inches. A grizzly bear, in its biggest bipedal posture, covers maybe 48 inches between steps. A tall running man covers 60. These tracks were walking, 71 inches, walking, and they came out of the water. That's the part I saved for last, because that's the part that changed everything for me. The tracks didn't come from the tree line. They didn't come from up the flat or down the flat. They started at the water line, fully formed, the first impression as deep and clear as the third. No transition, no shallow entry step. They walked the line of the seals and they went back into the Bem Canal, where the channel runs to 600 feet and the ebb tide runs at 4 knots. I stood on the tidal flat and I looked at the canal for a long time. Then the howl came from the water, not the shore, not the tree line, the open water, and it did not travel the way sound travels across a water surface. It arrived. It was just there, in my chest, and it didn't fade the way a carried sound fades. It cut off clean, the way a recording cuts off, and the flat was quiet, and I walked 800 meters back to the tree line without looking at the canal again. I made it to the staging area. I got in the float plane, I sat with the radio on for a while, and then I called my ex-husband, which I hadn't done since April, which I can't fully explain except to say that I needed to hear a voice that knew me from before I came to this place. He picked up. We talked. I didn't tell him what I'd found. I just listened to the sounds of the apartment, the one we'd shared, and I stayed on the line longer than I should have. There's a man named Thomas who runs kayak tours in the area. Tsimshian from Metlakatla. He filed the original mortality report that sent me out there, and after I had filed my own report and was sitting at the dock trying to figure out what I had just spent a morning looking at, I asked him what he knew about what lived in the Bem Canal. He said the word in Tsimshian first. Then he said his grandfather's people didn't fish this channel alone. I asked why. He looked at the water for a moment. Then he said, because it fishes back. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. That was November 2nd. I still have the photographs. I still have the measurements. The seals and whatever made those tracks are both real and documented, and neither of them has a satisfying explanation within the science, I know. That's not a comfortable place to live, professionally. But it's where I am. The coffee mug is still on the counter. I think I'm going to keep it. I was the youngest warden in the district. I want to say that up front so you understand the position I was in. 26 years old, 3 years in, just transferred from the data management office to field duty after asking twice. My supervisor approved the transfer with a note saying I'd be on solo surveys only after proving adequate field proficiency. I had done 11 solo surveys. I was trying to prove something. I know how that sounds in retrospect. A young man trying to prove himself in unfamiliar country. I know how the story is supposed to go. But I want to be clear that what happened on Pack Creek on August 19th was not the result of inexperience or recklessness. I read the situation correctly. I just couldn't do anything with the reading. Admiralty Island is one of the densest brown bear habitats in the world. Pack Creek, specifically, is where the bear observatory is, a section of the drainage where observers watch bears fishing for salmon in the summer months. I was there on a population survey, counting bears, documenting behavior, the kind of work I'd been doing for 14 months and had gotten genuinely good at. The morning was perfect. Partly cloudy, the alders along the creek banks thick and green, the creek running low and clear over gravel. I settled into the observation blind by 7:30 and watched a male, a female, and a subadult working the salmon pool for the better part of an hour. Normal. Beautiful. The kind of morning that makes you understand why you asked for this transfer. At 8:51, all 3 bears left the water at the same time. Not the way bears leave a pool, because a more dominant animal approaches, which is sequential, with posturing. All 3 simultaneously into the alders on the east bank, moving fast. And then the pool was empty, and the creek was running over the gravel, and there was nothing. 2 minutes later, I heard the first howl. I've heard wolves. The commission introduced wolves to Southeast Alaska, and I know their vocalization profile. This wasn't that. The fundamental frequency was lower, much lower. The sound sat in the air after it ended the way the last note of a piece of music sits in a concert hall, filling the space, not quite gone. I wrote down the direction and the estimated distance, and I kept watching. The second howl was closer. The third one I felt in the walls of the blind. The blind is built from 2-inch spruce lumber. It vibrated. Then the alders started moving. North of the observation pool, a corridor of movement coming south along the creek bank. Not wind, a specific path, something pushing through. I watched it come. It stopped about 80 meters north of the blind, and the alder movement stopped. The smell came through the gaps in the wall, sweet rot and wet fur, and underneath that something warm, the heat of a large-bodied thing that hadn't been standing still long enough to cool. It was close. I don't know exactly how close. I had my eye at the viewing slot, and I could see the alder stand where the movement had stopped, and I could see nothing in it, which is its own kind of information. My field notebook shows an entry at 9 o'clock. The next entry is at 13:47. 4 hours and 47 minutes. 4 blank pages. I have looked at those pages under different light conditions, trying to find anything. There's an impression on the top page, not ink. The impression of a pen held against paper without moving, the way a hand holds a pen when the hand is not writing. Like I was sitting there with the pen touching the page for a long time, not writing anything. That's all I have of that interval. At 13:47, I became aware of the blind around me, the way you become aware of a room when you wake in a strange place. I was there. I didn't know how long I had been there or what had happened in the gap. The smell was gone. The alders were still. I looked at my watch. I looked at the notebook. Then I looked through the viewing slot. The adult male and the subadult were on the gravel bank north of the pool, dead, positioned on their sides. No visible wounds, no blood spread beyond what was immediately beneath them, no drag marks in the surrounding gravel, no sign of struggle, no ravens, no eagles. A multi-100-pound bear on an open gravel bank should draw scavengers within minutes in that habitat. There were none. I measured 1-track impression in the creek bank sediment before I left. 14 inches. 68-inch stride. The long bones on the male's right forelimb showed the same compressive fracture pattern I later learned had been documented in other incident reports across the Tongass. Bones broken cleanly across the diameter, the way you'd press down on something until it gave. I walked the transect back to the staging area and got in my boat and left. On the way out, I passed an older warden who has been in the Admiralty District for a long time. When I filed my report, he called me, and I told him about the blank pages, and he was quiet for a while, and then he told me something. The Tlingit name for Admiralty Island is Kutsnuwu, Fortress of the Bears. The bears are why humans didn't settle the interior. But the Tlingit oral history, he said, the old part of it, says the bears were not the first large thing on that island. The bears came later. The thing that was there first stayed in the drainage because of the bears. The bears were a buffer. I'd been between the drainage and the shore. I keep thinking about those 4 blank pages, about the pen impression, about the fact that my hand was holding a pen for 4 hours and 47 minutes and the page stayed empty. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it's better or worse than knowing. What I know is that I went back to field surveys the following week. I am still going back. I'm not going to let what happened on Pack Creek take the field from me because the field is the thing I fought to get, and I'm not giving it up. But I do not go to Admiralty Island alone anymore. That's not cowardice. That's the correct operational adjustment. There's a difference. I've been a warden for 15 years. I'm retiring in June. I want you to keep both of those facts in your mind while I tell you this, because they're the frame for everything else. 15 years in the Tongass district means 15 years of understanding what this landscape is and isn't. I know what lives here and how it lives and what the signs of its living look like. I have never been frightened in the field in a way that compromised my ability to do my job. I say that not to sound impressive, but because the opposite impression would undermine what I'm about to tell you. A frightened person seeing things on March ice in Glacier Bay is a different story than a 15-year senior warden seeing things on March ice in Glacier Bay. I need you to know which story this is. I requested the Tar Inlet Winter Survey specifically. I asked for it because I have surveyed that inlet in every season over 15 years, and I wanted to do it one more time before I leave. The tar is extraordinary in March. The fair weather range above the cloud ceiling, the ice blue-green from glacial flower suspension, the silence of a drainage that hasn't had a human visitor in 4 months. I have loved that place for a decade and a half. I wanted to carry it out with me when I go. I landed on skis on the inlet ice at 8 in the morning and I started the survey. For the first hour and 20 minutes, it was everything I came for. Mountain goat tracks on the lower ice, sea lion haul-out evidence at the margin, the Grand Pacific calving face doing its slow, intermittent work above me. Beautiful. Complete. Then I found the first goat. She was positioned on her back on clear ice, limbs extended outward, and her head was gone. Not broken off. Separated cleanly at the second cervical vertebra, the cut so precise that my first thought was a blade, which is the wrong thought, but it shows you how clean it was. The blood was pooled beneath her, contained. No spray pattern, no evidence of a struggle. No drag marks anywhere in the surrounding ice. And no birds, no raven, no eagle, no gull, on a dead ungulate lying exposed on open ice. That absence is the detail I keep returning to. Scavenger birds in that corridor are constant. They find a carcass within minutes. They were not there. I found 7 more sites in the next 2 hours, 8 total. Mountain goats and harbor seals, all the same presentation, all the same absence of heads, all the same contained blood pool, all the same impossible quiet around them. 8 sites across 6 kilometers of inlet. The same thing, 8 times across an entire drainage. I documented every one of them. At 11 o'clock, I heard the first howl. From the north, from the ice field above the calving face, where nothing large-bodied lives in March. The sound is something I'm going to try to describe accurately, and I want you to know that the descriptions I've heard from other wardens who have heard it are all correct, and they're still not enough. It doesn't arrive as sound arrives. Pressure changes before the sound begins, the way your ears register an altitude shift. And then the sound comes through that changed pressure, and it is lower and longer and fuller than anything you have a reference for in large canned vocalizations. When it stops, the silence after it is different from the silence before it. Something has changed in the air. The second howl came from the east, the moraine wall of the Margerie Glacier. The third came from the south, from behind me, from between me and my float plane. I was standing on open ice in the center of Tar Inlet, and each of the 3 compass points around me had just announced itself. They came onto the ice from 3 directions, 4 of them total, the 4th from the west, moving across the ice surface on all 4s, and then rising to 2 legs as they slowed. The transition is smooth as water, finding a new level. 9 feet tall, roughly, each of them, when they stood. Dark. The head was a canid skull, at a scale the body required, but the body demanded, the skull correctly proportioned to everything beneath it, which was the detail that broke through my professional detachment entirely, because I had been prepared for something wrong, and I found something complete. 1 to each compass point, me in the center. I didn't run. There was nowhere to run to, and in any case, the decision not to run felt important in a way I couldn't have articulated then, and still struggle to articulate now. I stood on the ice, and the cold was in my legs, all the way to my hips, and the northwest wind was pushing ice crystals into any exposed skin, and the calving face was making its periodic sounds behind the largest one, and I waited. The largest one looked at me across the length of the inlet. It had been standing at the nearest goat carcass when it arrived, and it had not moved from that position. We looked at each other for a long time in the deteriorating afternoon light. Then it made a sound that was below the howl, below vocalization entirely, into the range where sound stops being sound and becomes pressure. I felt it in the ice through my boots. I felt it in the fillings in my back teeth. And the other 3 answered it with the same sound. And then the largest one turned and went back onto the ice field, and the other 3 went the way they'd come, and I was alone on the Tar Inlet, with 8 headless carcasses, and the calving face, and the cold. I walked 15 kilometers back to the float plane in the dark. I know this section of ice, and I had my headlamp, and I walked it, and I made it, and I flew home. I called my husband from the plane. I was composed by the time I called him. I talked to him for 20 minutes about nothing specific, and then I said I was coming home Thursday, and I had some things I wanted to tell him. About the work, about what the work has been, all 15 years of it. The real version, not the version I gave him to keep him from worrying. I told him Thursday, all of it, including this. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, and he listened the way he has always listened, and when I finished, he was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Do you still want to retire in June?" I thought about the Tar Inlet in March, the Fairweather Range, the blue-green ice. The silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something too large to make noise in the way we understand noise. I said yes. I still want to retire in June. Not because I'm afraid, because 15 years is the right number, and because the place is still what it has always been, and because I want to spend the next part of my life knowing what I know about this landscape without being responsible for the safety of other people in it. That's the honest answer. The inlet decided to let me go. I'm going to take that and carry it carefully. My grandfather told me about this watershed when I was 12 years old. We were on Prince of Wales Island in the interior, and he was teaching me to read the land the way his people have always read it, and he stopped at a certain point in the Thorn Bay drainage, and he said there were sections of this watershed where his people did not go at certain times of year. He gave me the Haida name for what lived there. He told me the name was old, older than the Haida presence on the island, and his people's history on this island goes back thousands of years. He said, "We did not name it. We only named what it does." I was 12. I let the conversation end without asking what it does. By the time I was old enough to want the answer, he was gone. I have worked the Thorn Bay watershed for 7 of my 11 years with the Commission. I have told myself every season that my grandfather was encoding practical caution in the shape of traditional knowledge, the way older generations do. Don't go too far into the interior in fall. Don't go alone. I translated it into professional practice. I followed the general principle while letting go of the specific weight behind it. September 27th was the day I stopped doing that. I went in on a Roosevelt elk survey following 3 consecutive no-contact weeks on trail cameras in a parcel that had been reliably producing elk activity for years. The September forest on Prince of Wales is spruce and cedar pressing close to the game trails, the canopy running continuous, the air smelling of rain and bark and the fermented salmonberry crop. I know this forest. I know its sounds and its silences. I know which silences are normal and which aren't. The first elk kill site was at 8:43. Adult bull, estimated 700 pounds, no head. The cervical separation was at the same point I later learned the other wardens had documented in their own cases. The same clean separation, the same contained blood pool. Long bone fractures in both right forelimbs showing compressive breaks perpendicular to the bone axis, marrow exposed at both ends, no tooth marks anywhere, no drag marks around the carcass, no scavenger activity. I found 3 more sites before noon, all bulls, all the same, and the smell was at each one, that sweet mineral cave smell with the wet fur underneath, and it was stronger at the 4th site than it had been at the first, which meant I was moving towards something and not away from it. I followed the tracks in the afternoon, bipedal, 14.5 inches, 69-inch stride. They moved through the watershed from south to north, which was the direction I was moving. I was tracking something that had already passed through. Or so I was telling myself. At 13:40, I found a section of the trackway where the stride compressed from 69 inches to 41. 10 meters of compressed stride. The toe pressure in those steps 3 times the heel pressure, then back to the long walking stride. Something had been moving upright, had shifted its weight forward and down, had covered 10 meters in a different mode, and resumed the walk. Getting low. The way something gets low when it's close to the thing it's interested in. I was on the game trail when I found those tracks. I was the thing on the trail. I turned around and I moved back toward the logging road. Not running, moving with intention, which is different from running, and was the correct decision. in a way I can't fully defend, but knew was right. The smell was consistent all the way back, slightly stronger to the northwest, and the birds had been silent since noon, and I noted that, and I kept moving. At 6:20, I came out of the tree line onto the clear-cut margin of logging road 3,100. 3-year-old clear-cut, the slash still on the ground, young alder coming in thick and waist-high. The road ran east-west in front of me, and my truck was 400 meters east. It was standing at the west end of the clear-cut, 9 feet tall, upright, dark against the Sitka spruce behind it. The head was wrong for the body, and the body was wrong for the head, and both of them together made something complete, something that had its own internal logic, the way all living things have their own internal logic when you look at them clearly enough. I was 200 meters away across a clear cut in the September dusk, and I could see it clearly, and I understood, looking at it, what my grandfather had given me that name for. Not the translation, the meaning. The eyes were yellow. I have read descriptions of the eye shine, and I want to say something the other accounts don't quite get to. At 200 meters in ambient dusk light, reflective eye shine should not be visible. What I was seeing wasn't reflected light. The eyes produced light. I don't have a biological explanation for that. I'm a trained field officer, and I don't have an explanation, and I'm telling you what I saw. We looked at each other for a long time, long enough for the dusk to go to dark, and the alder to lose its color. Then it made the sub-frequency sound, the sound that arrives as pressure before it arrives as hearing. And from the north tree line and the south tree line, sounds answered, the same frequency. A conversation. Then it turned and went back into the spruce, and I walked to my truck. I drove out of the watershed on logging road 3,100 with the headlights on and the drizzle on the windshield and the dark on both sides of the road. I thought about my grandfather, about the name he gave me and the explanation he started and I let end, about the fact that I have been in this watershed for 7 years and I was never afraid of it until the day I should have been afraid of it from the beginning. I called my grandfather's sister that night. She's the oldest person in my family. She knew him. I asked her to tell me the full story, the one he'd started. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the Haida name translates to something like, the one who holds the boundary, not enforces it, holds it, like a membrane holds two things apart. She said, September is one of the thin times. The boundary gets thin. The one who holds it comes closer to the surface. I said, he tried to tell me this. She said, he tried to tell everyone. Not everyone wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear it. I just didn't listen soon enough. That's the cost of September 27th, and I'm carrying it, and I'm listening now. I wrote the protocol. I want to say that at the start because it shapes everything that comes after it. The ADF and G field incident protocol, revised edition, is the document that tells wardens in this district how to behave in dangerous or uncertain field situations. It was written to translate field experience into clear guidance. I wrote it well, based on 22 years of field experience, and it is a good protocol. I believe that. It wasn't adequate for what happened at the Situk River Field Station. Let me tell you why I was there. Over the 14 months before my October survey, 4 wardens in this district filed incident reports describing encounters with something they could not classify. Same bone fracture morphology across all 4 cases. Same absence of scavenger activity at kill sites. Same sub-frequency vocalization. Same bipedal tracks with stride lengths outside any cataloged North American predator. 4 different drainages spread across the Tongass. 4 different officers, 1 pattern. I ran the correlation analysis. I identified the pattern, and I decided the appropriate response was a direct field investigation by a senior officer, which I defined as myself, because I am the district supervisor and I wrote the protocol, and if the protocol was going to be tested in the field, I was the appropriate person to test it. I also want to tell you that my daughter is 18 months old. Her name is Maggie. She has 5 words. I went into that field station on October 22nd, carrying the specific awareness that I had a person waiting for me who was not yet old enough to understand waiting. And that awareness was with me every moment of the next 2 days. The Yakutat forelands are a broad coastal lowland between the Fairweather Range and the Gulf of Alaska. The Situk River, winding through a mosaic of Sitka spruce, paper birch, and open sedge meadow. The field station is a permanent commission structure on a gravel bench above the East Bank, built in 1987, solid and familiar. I have used it on 14 previous surveys. I know every board of it. The first day was documentation. 10 mortality sites total, counting both days. All consistent with the pattern in the prior reports. No drag marks, no scatter, no scavenger activity. Heads absent, compressive bone fractures. I know how to read a field scene, and I read these scenes completely, and what they said was the same thing all 4 previous reports had said. Something large, bipedal, with a stride that doesn't belong in any North American wildlife catalog, had been through this drainage, and it had not been careful about leaving evidence. I went back to the field station at 4 in the afternoon, made coffee, called my husband on the satellite phone, talked to Maggie, heard her say the words she has, mama, ball, dog, more, no, and then put the phone to her mouth, which she always does, and I heard the sounds of our house through the speaker, and I held the phone and I stayed on that call longer than I needed to. I didn't tell him what I'd found. I said the survey was going well. At 5:30, the first howl came. I have read 4 accounts of this sound. I wrote the protocol. None of it prepared me. The field station walls moved. The single-pane windows transmitted it as a vibration I felt in my fingertips on the glass. It came through the floor. It came through the chair I was sitting in. The sub-frequency undertone the other wardens described is accurate and is not enough. The sound occupies you. It's inside you and the building and the darkness outside simultaneously, and when it ends, the silence is changed, and you are changed, and there is nothing in the protocol that covers this specific transition. I wrote down the direction and the distance. I locked the door and the windows. I turned on every light. Then I sat back down at my field desk, and I tried to continue the incident documentation, because the protocol says to document, and documenting gives the hands something to do, and the hands needed something. 3 more howls, each from a different direction. By the 4th, I was surrounded. At 10 o'clock that night, the footsteps started. Gravel around the station perimeter. 4-beat rhythm, then shifting to 2-beat, smooth as a gear change, then back to 4. Something circling the building, south wall to east wall, to north wall, to west wall, and back to south. The full circuit took about 4 minutes. I tracked it by sound, turning in my chair as it moved, keeping my face toward whichever wall it was passing. It did this 4 times through the night. The smell was everywhere. The sweet cave smell, and the wet fur smell, and underneath both of them, the animal warmth of a large body that had been working. Present all 4 circuits, strongest at the north wall, which has no windows. The fourth circuit, at 3:30 in the morning, was different. The footsteps stopped at the north wall, and the pressure arrived. I don't have a better word for it. Physical pressure at the back of my skull, localized, the sensation of being assessed by something close enough to reach me, if 2 inches of spruce wasn't between us. Goosebumps rose on only the right side of my body, which is the strangest detail and the one I find hardest to explain, and the one I believe most completely, because there's no reason to invent it. I sat at the field desk and I looked at the north wall, and I thought about Maggie. Not in a desperate way, clearly. The way a fixed point is clear in poor visibility. Mama, ball, dog, more, no, 5 words. I wanted to be there when she got the 6th. After 3 minutes by my watch, the footsteps resumed and completed the circuit and moved northwest, and the smell thinned over the next hour, and by 4:40, the ravens came back to the spruce on the west bank. When the ravens come back, the thing is gone. That's what I learned that night. That's a thing I'm going to add to the protocol. The second day, I finished the survey. I'm telling you that because I want you to understand it. I finished the survey. I went back into the drainage on the morning of October 23rd, and I documented 4 more mortality sites, and I did it thoroughly and completely, and I am not ashamed of the fact that I was afraid the entire time. At 1:15 in the afternoon, 5.5 kilometers upstream from the field station, I heard a single howl. From the direction of the station. Distant. One howl, no response. I'm not going to speculate about what it meant. I know what it did. My first thought, in the moment, before the professional assessment, before the documentation reflex, was Maggie. One howl in an empty drainage, and my first thought was my daughter's name. That's what clarified things. That's when I finished what I was doing, and I walked back to the station. The north wall of the station, that morning, had a frost impression on the exterior surface. A hand, 7 feet off the ground, 5 digits. The palm was about twice the width of an adult human hand, and the length of the fingers was in the right ratio, the ratio that says primate. It had pressed its hand flat against the outside of the wall at 3:30 in the morning, and held it there long enough to leave a complete impression, and then it moved on. 2 inches of spruce between us. I photographed it. I drove out. I called my husband from Yakutat. This time, I told him everything. He listened the way he always does. When I finished, he was quiet. Then he said, "Do you still want to go back?" I thought about that for a moment. The Situk River in October, the sedge meadows, the spruce and birch, the calving season after the long winter, the river running high with snowmelt in June. The sound of it, the smell of it. 22 years of this landscape that I have loved and known and spent myself in. I said yes, I'm going back. Because what walked that perimeter 4 times and put its hand on the north wall and then moved on made a decision, I'm still alive because of, and I don't know what that decision was based on, and I don't know what I would have had to do differently to get a different outcome. I know I sat still and I waited, and in the morning the ravens came back. That's all I know. But I'm revising the protocol. I'm adding a section on unclassified large predator encounters. I'm recommending consultation with every indigenous cultural authority in the 6 drainage areas where these incidents have occurred. I'm doing all of that because the protocol I wrote wasn't sufficient, and I am the appropriate person to fix it. And I'm not going back alone. That's the other revision. Maggie has 6 words now. The new one is out, as in she wants to go outside, as in she points at the door and says out, with the same precision she applies to all her words. And we take her outside and she stands in the yard and looks at the sky. Out. That's the word. I understand exactly